Hi everyone, and welcome to In Deep Geek Live. Today we are looking at King Aenys the First. He's rather an overlooked king, in my view, because he's sandwiched between Aegon the Conqueror, who we obviously know about, and Maegor the Cruel, who is a hugely fascinating character who we're going to look at next week. But that doesn't mean that Aenys himself is not an interesting character. So what I thought I'd do today, as always, I'm going to frame this around questions from my patrons. I'll try and pick up as many questions as I can in the chat as we're going through. But what I thought I'd do to start with today was to give a little bit of what his life and his reign was about, because sometimes the details kind of get lost. So Aenys the First was born the first child of King Aegon and his second wife, Rhaenys. He was born in the year 7 AC. So the conquering of Westeros has happened. Aegon and his sister wives are ruling. Dorne is still being independent, and that whole invasion has not gone very well. But generally speaking, the Targaryens have gained their toehold, more than their toehold, their stranglehold over the Seven Kingdoms. The first thing to really notice about him growing up was he was a sickly child. He wasn't very robust. He was ill quite a lot. And then when he was very young, just 3, his mother died. And this was obviously a hugely traumatizing moment for him, and he regressed in his development. He had been a normal-ish 3-year-old, but then suddenly he went back to crawling, he spoke less. This is all, when we look at it through a modern lens, entirely understandable. The child had been through quite a traumatic experience, but it did mean that some people, particularly Visenya, started questioning whether this really was somebody who would be a good and strong king for the Seven Kingdoms. Indeed, the rumors had been there right from the beginning that maybe he wasn't even Aegon's real son. He did resemble Aegon, but he resembled his mother a lot more, and he resembled, in particular, in his love for music and the arts, the kind of men that his mother seemed to like to hang around with when Aegon wasn't there. So the rumors were already there. However, once he got given a dragon egg and a baby dragon, Quicksilver, that's when he really started to grow. And at that point, we're told the rumors all stopped. People could see he was a Targaryen and he wasn't just going to be a sickly small child forever. And he grew and grew to love riding a dragon. And he grew up to be a competent, if not good, fighter. He grew up to be a clever, if not genius or well-learned kind of person. He grew up to be well-liked, if not necessarily well-loved. And overall, we kind of get the impression that he was a little bit average, which is not really what the kingdom needed right at the time. His half-brother, Maegor, arrived in due course. Again, the rumors were Visenya took a look at him and thought, this isn't who we want as king. This isn't who we need as king. And Maegor, her son Maegor, was the exact opposite. All of the things that Aenys was weak at, Maegor was strong at. But although Visenya often kind of queried and questioned it, there was never any doubt. Aegon had decided Aenys was going to inherit after he died. And sure enough, in 35 AC, Aegon did die. Now, at this point, we have a young new king. And he took over a kingdom which is familiar and yet also a little bit different to what we have. So King's Landing did exist, but it was a young place. The biggest city by far still was Old Town. That's where the Faith of the Seven were based. The Red Keep, had only just started being built. The foundations were there and a few other little things. There was nothing in terms of infrastructure for King's Landing. It was just people having built things wherever they wanted to, surrounding where the Iron Throne was. This was a kingdom very much in need of strong leadership. Aenys did not provide that, it has to be said. What we are told is that although he was liked and he had lots of friends, he dithered over decisions. He didn't like to offend anyone. He didn't want to have anyone dislike him, so he didn't want to make the hard decisions that kings often have to make. What this led to really quite quickly was 4 separate rebellions. Now, fortunately, each of these 4 were quite small and contained. There was one in the Iron Islands, there was one down in Harrenhal, there was one in the Vale, there was one down in Dorne. Now, each of those 4 were put down, but in each case, really, it wasn't due to Aenys. He didn't actually personally take a little bit in the one down in sort of just outside Dorne with the Vulture King, but not really. It was the local lords who dealt with these things. Now, what that meant was that he then came across as looking, as he was, quite weak. The realm remained united. The realm remained ostensibly as strong as it was, but he personally had shown that he was not about to stand up to opposition in the way that his father had. There was never any point at which he would get on his dragon and go and just burn everybody who got in the way. That wasn't the way that he operated. And indeed, one of the more significant decisions that he made was with the rebellion in the Iron Islands. Greyjoys put down the rebellion that was there, and Aenys said, "Thank you. What anything you want, I will grant you." And they said, "Well, in that case, can we please get rid of all of the Faith of the Seven off of the Iron Islands? Thank you very much." And Aenys felt honor bound to do that. And that had huge long-term implications, because the Faith of the Seven left, and that meant, therefore, that the old way and the old religion there of the Drowned God could once more start to grow in the Iron Islands. The other really significant decision he made early on in his kingship was to make Maegor, his half-brother, his Hand of the King. And he did this because he recognized Maegor's strengths that he did not personally have. Indeed, he even handed over the sword Blackfire to Maegor and said, "Here you go, you could use this better than I can." So some people, Visenya, saw that as a recognition by Aenys that he was not worthy to be king, that Maegor should be king. Others, perhaps less so. This is a running thread with the sword Blackfire, incidentally, all the way through, and particularly when we get to the Blackfire rebellions. Does possession of that sword mean that that person is the rightful king? Some people claim so, others do not. In this instance, Aenys, as king, clearly did not think he was handing over the kingship to somebody, but Visenya thought that that was symbolically what was happening. Anyway, then came 2 other crucial decisions. His brother Maegor had not had any children and desperately wanted children. He was married to Cerys Hightower at the time, and he took a second wife. Aenys had a problem with this because the faith had a huge problem with this. This was polygamy. The faith hated this. And so he did set a firm line. He said, okay, either set aside your new wife or go off in exile for 5 years. And Maegor said, okay, I'll go off in exile for 5 years. And he headed off. Aenys said, could you just leave the sword Blackfire behind? Because, you know, that's the sword of the kings. And Maegor just ignored him. So he was gone. His Hand of the King was gone. the greatest dragon in the world. Drogon was gone. The sword, Blackfire, was gone. Aenys was there, suddenly looking a whole lot weaker. And the second decision he made during this time, which had huge ramifications, was he decided to get his two oldest children engaged, one to the other, Aegon and Alyssa. And he got them married. Again, the faith up in arms. This was against what the faith believed. This is incest. They kind of let Aegon and his sister wives get away with it because, you know, they came and threatened to burn down Old Town, basically. But Aenys wasn't that kind of guy. So, up in arms about this. And there came a faith uprising. Now, Aenys had come to the decision that what he should do in order to get the people to love him was what his father did, which was to tour on these great progresses, tour the land, meet the people locally, engage with them at a local level. And that was a reasonable idea. But what it meant was that he was out of King's Landing when this great faith uprising happened, and basically he then had to escape off over to Dragonstone. And his son, Aegon, he had also sent out on one of these progresses, and he was trapped over in the Westerlands with his wife. And this is where, just 7 short years into his reign, he was when he died. Now, I've got a question about his death coming up, so we'll look into it in a bit more detail there. But he escaped there basically almost giving up on ruling the Seven Kingdoms direct from Dragonstone, from King's Landing. And his health started failing. Visenya said, I'll look after him. And she did. And for a while he got a bit better, but then he died. Aged 35. Very young, but apparently by the end he looked as if he was a 60-year-old. He was prematurely aging. On his deathbed, suddenly everything, the situation changed. Visenya immediately went off, got Maegor, and Maegor came in and claimed the throne. So this is something we'll talk about next week. But that overall is Aenys, King Aenys's reign and rule. It was not a strong rule. Nobody is pretending it was. He did not make many good decisions. He's not really remembered for much, to be honest. He's one of the few kings who, if you look at the monikers they're given, we get Aegon the Conqueror, Maegor the Cruel. They get these different names, nicknames almost. He doesn't really get one. So it's almost as if he's seen as this kind of like slight digression in history. However, the line of Targaryens that we have coming down today does come through him. So it's not as if he was just a ruler who didn't matter at all. Jaehaerys and Alysanne, the great King Jaehaerys, was his son. And so from this line come all of the great and good and terrible rulers who are to follow. Aenys is, as much as Aegon the Conqueror is, he is the progenitor of all of the Targaryen rulers that we have. So there is a sort of an overview of all of that. Let's have a quick look in the chat. Had a question from Roman Lakovets saying, in your older videos, there is a picture of you in a medieval cloak and hood. May I ask what the context for it was? The context was that was what I wore when I started this channel. I thought it looked cool. I still like it, to be honest, but I wore it as a one-off again, I think, as a thank you to my moderators when I hit something like 400,000 subscribers. Yeah, it's hidden away in a cupboard somewhere, and maybe it'll come out again some other time. Andrew Kay saying Aenys is quite low on the ranking or list of Targaryen kings. Definitely a few worse ones than him, but he was quite ineffective. Yeah, so I think if I were to summarize Aenys, it would not be as a bad king. He seems to have actually been quite a nice guy, as far as we can understand. He seemed to have been a patron of the arts. He seems to have loved his family. He seems to have been the kind of person you'd quite enjoy hanging out with. But as an effective king, no, he wasn't. The realm which he inherited, probably, but for a strong king like Maegor, who had his own faults, we'll get on to him next time, but for Maegor, probably would have split up apart again because of how weak Aenys was. Question from... I think I did have another one here somewhere. Oh, Mara Lee saying, just a show of support and love for the merch content and the great stories in the Well-Told Tale. You're much loved and appreciated. Thank you. Well, thank you very, Mara. You know, I hugely appreciate your support. I tried to wrap up a few of your questions on Patreon, incidentally, in that intro that I did. So hopefully that answers a few of them. But the one thing you did ask, which I'm not sure whether I picked up on, was what happened to Dark Sister. So Maegor already had one of the two Targaryen Valyrian steel swords, Dark Sister, which was his mother Visenya's sword. She gave it to him when he was quite young. Then he got given Blackfire, so he had both of these swords. He never used Dark Sister again after he had been given Blackfire, but he didn't give it to anyone else either. So as best as we can understand, he just like hung it up on the wall and that was it. So a bit of a waste in many ways, but it does show you a lot about Maegor's character, is that he just didn't want anyone else to have it. A lot of the kings gave Dark Sister to a trusted lieutenant, somebody who they thought would be always looking after them, a brother or someone like that. So you see, for example, when we get to Viserys and he gives it to his brother Daemon in House of the Dragon, but deep down, for all of Daemon's flaws and faults, that he cared about his brother and he was always going to be on his brother's side. That's the kind of thing. And similarly, Bloodraven much later had Dark Sister. It's often somebody who you trust absolutely and want them to have the best weapon possible. Go to a question from Mara Lee, just giving a little bit of mod love. If you're watching, by the way, and please just send a little bit of love to the moderators. They are fantastic people. Reflective Rambling saying there's also something to be said about a ruler who doesn't have a time with enough drama or controversy to get a nickname. Yeah, so he didn't get a nickname, but there was drama and controversy during his reign. So he was the High Septon did give him a name, I think King Abomination or something along those lines, but that didn't really stick in what the Maesters recorded as a sort of a name for him. So yeah, I suspect if he'd carried on, then people would have given him some sort of Aenys the Ineffective or something like that. But his reign was quite short, and it was followed by two incredibly powerful and important kings, one after the other, in Maegor and then Jaehaerys. So I think that's probably why he just got overlooked by the history books. It's even when you read Fire and Blood, there's not huge amounts about him. It kind of skims past him. You get the big section on the conquest and Aegon and his sister wives, then we get big section on Maegor, but on Aenys, not so much. Martin S saying, hi, I watched your videos about Maegor, whose mother preferred him as king over his much nicer half-brother. All that reminded me of the loathsome king wannabe Regal Farseer from Robin Hobb's novels. Yeah, I've said many times the Robin Hobb's Farseer trilogy, Assassin's Apprentice is the first one. Lots of crossover between that and A Song of Ice and Fire. They are very good friends, Robin Hobb and George R. R. Martin, and they started writing those series at the same time. They read each other's drafts. They shared, I believe, an editor. Very close, and you can see a lot of the things which sort of cross over between the two of them. Question from Moondancer. Hi, Robert. Can't stay, but we'll catch up later. Just wanted to drop in and show some love. Thanks for the great content. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate it. Andrew Kay saying the realm was still on shaky ground just one generation after the conquest. A weak, indecisive, pliable king was not ideal for that point. No, absolutely. I think that's going to be the theme which runs through all of this, is that he may have been a nice man, but he wasn't a good king. So when we do these rankings, people often sort of talk about the rankings of the kings, and some people put, for example, Maegor quite high because he was a strong character, but he obviously wasn't a very nice person. So I think this is a matter of what you, when you're ranking the kings, what you value more highly. Where do you place Aenys and Maegor? As kings, Maegor was probably more effective, although you have to point out he also had a short reign, at the end of which the entire kingdom had turned against him. So I think the claims that Maegor, we'll get on to Maegor more next time, but I think the claims that Maegor was a strong and effective king are sometimes overplayed a little bit. But George R. R. Martin does, in Fire and Blood, we are invited to think through that issue. We're invited to see that the two, particularly when they're young, but then as they grow up, we're invited to see these two half-brothers and question who would be the better king, who is the better king when they become kings. So it's, George R. R. Martin doesn't spoon feed us and say this is a better person than that. We're supposed to do the hard work and come to our own kind of decisions on that. Okay, let's go to a question from Alhad saying, did the Targaryens, post-conquering, except being dragon riding, dreams and visions, practice any magic? Did they decide not to practice once they left Valyria? Apart from Visenya, I'm trying to remember any other Targaryens being overtly a magic user or associated with magical characters. Again, except Alice Rivers with Aemond, and we directly see the Great Bastards using magic. Okay, so this is a really interesting thing just to dip into. So in terms of Targaryens using magic, adjacent to magic, I think you've picked out the big ones. Visenya is associated with magic. Whether she herself was a magic user or not, she definitely seemed to have access to some magic in some way. Probably the most notable time is with Maegor, who was near death. She flew off, got Tiana of the Towers, and brought him back. Tiana of the Towers was clearly some sort of magic user. But, and then beyond that, we get the Great Bastards. Shira Seastar, Bloodravens explicitly told that they used magic. So we have them as well. But then also you get a lot of the later Targaryens, a good example being Aegon V, Egg, do try to use magic to hatch dragon eggs because they just think this needs magic. And he called in magic users, pyromancers from Asshai, and he was trying to do magic at the tragedy at Summerhall. It wasn't just a big fire. This was magical. So there are quite a few who engage with magic. But the interesting thing is that we don't know much about how Valyria worked. House of the Dragon, and I can only assume that this had, I mean, it will have had a tick from George R. R. Martin as a, yes, this is okay for the TV show. Whether that means it's true for the book canon as well, we do not know. But there was a really intriguing line which we just skidded past on the show when we get Viserys. If you remember him when he's playing with his huge model of Valyria, and he's saying, I think he's talking to Rhaenyra at the time, or maybe Alicent, I can't remember exactly who it is, and he's saying that in Valyria, the dragon riders lived close to the volcano, which was the source of their magic. And then he pointed elsewhere and say, and that's where the blood magicians were, which it has a huge amount of information in just one throwaway line, but it does seem to imply that the dragon riders were distinct and different from the blood magicians. And that does seem to imply that perhaps the Targaryens, as dragon riders, were not magicians. They had the dragony magic, which we've seen, which means dragon riding, also the dragon dreams. But actual magic beyond that, they seem not to have. So if I had to guess, we're not told, but if I had to guess, the cutoff would have been when they moved away from Valyria, they cut themselves off from the blood magicians, meaning therefore that the magic of old Valyria they were no longer using. So that's my best guess on that one. Miles of House Bars saying, hi Robert, before the conquest happened, were the maesters already in place with the Lords of the Realm, or is that something the conquerors or their descendants did? No, but absolutely, before the conquest, maesters were everywhere. This was the equivalent of I mean, it's sort of the monks in medieval Europe, but also private tutors. That's how a lot of the Lords of the Realm, not only were they used for the Raven Mail, but also they were there to teach the children. And that's, again, in kind of medieval Europe, that is a thing that often happened, was that the richest of the rich, they would hire a learned person to come into wherever they lived, their castle, and teach their children. They would to live there and to teach their children. And this is the kind of feel we've got going on. And that had happened for a long time, all the way through. And there was a maester at Dragonstone, for example. There was maesters Winterfell all over the place. It became more of a thing, yes, after the conquest, because the Seven Kingdoms became more united, more unified. It was much less of a deal to be traveling around, much less of a deal for somebody in the north to be getting a maester, for example, because after the conquest, you're going along the Rose Road and then up the King's Road, and then you get there. Before the conquest, you're traveling through 3, 4, 5 different kingdoms. Much before the conquest, maybe dozens of different kingdoms who may be at war one with another. There wasn't the road system in place, so it was a lot harder. So when the Seven Kingdoms came into being, it spread out, but the maesters were definitely there, out and about beforehand. 444 saying, thank you for the recommendations for audio versions of Lord of the Rings. This was a question from last time. I've decided to listen to both. This year, Andy Serkis, and next year, Rob Inglis. Pardon me. I think that's, yeah, excellent. I think they're both really good versions. I hope you enjoy them. You then say, regarding Aenys, I think his biggest problems with a lack of mother in most of his life and a lack of good advisors. As I understand the first thing, I'm not really sure about the second. Why do you think he wasn't better prepared to rule by his father and aunt, who, as we know, both loved his mother, or even by some friend of the family? Well, this is a point which isn't really developed much in Fire and Blood. Why wasn't he prepared for leadership, for kingship? He was a bit. It's not as if he got completely ignored. I think the lack of having his mother there was very important, clearly. His father, though, was also absent a lot. He spent a lot of his time on progresses going around the Seven Kingdoms. When he wasn't doing that, he spent a lot of his time in Dragonstone. He wasn't really there all that much, but he'd made sure that Aenys had good training in fighting. We're told that he became a good fighter without ever looking like he was going to be excellent. He was clearly taught to read and write. He was clearly taught about the arts. There wasn't, however, anyone who seemed to sort of bring him into the role of being a king. This is quite hard because Aegon was making it up as he went along, but we're not told really of the same kind of thing that we had with, say, Viserys later with Rhaenyra, where he brought her into the small council so that she could start learning about how to govern. None of that really seemed to be there. The part of the issue is, as I say, Aegon was making it up as he went along. He didn't have a small council really to start with. The small council as a thing wasn't until we get to Jaehaerys. It wasn't really a concept. There were these people who were in charge of stuff. There was a Hand of the King, there was a Master of Coin, and so on. But as a governance structure, it wasn't really there. So one could argue that Aegon did not teach Aenys how to be a good king, because he himself didn't really know how to be a good king. He himself was still trying to figure out how to manage the Seven Kingdoms. And a lot of it, he was at war, basically. So, and after that, trying to just unite the Seven Kingdoms. So, the question about an advisor, though, I think is a slightly different one, because the implication is that Aenys did have a lot of advisors. He had lots of people telling him stuff, suggesting different things. The problem was not lack of advice, it was a lack of decision-making on his part, a lack of decisiveness. He seemed to not want to disappoint anyone. He seemed to not want people to dislike him. So somebody would come in and suggest something and he'd go, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Somebody else would come in and say something else and say, oh yeah, that's a good idea too. And he would dither. He just wouldn't be proactive. So that's the issue, was not the lack of good advice, it's the lack of actually making a decision. Question from Martin S. It is weird in worlds where someone being a bastard is considered a huge problem, but someone being an incest child is not. Clearly, your parents being close relatives is a far greater health risk than them being unmarried. Yes, but I agree completely. But this is not for the Targaryens. This was not a thing that they were concerned about. They were concerned about the purity of the Valyrian bloodline passing on down through the generations. Our modern understandings of the problems with genetic problems with incest would not have been something that they would have been particularly concerned about. So yeah, I agree with you. It's very weird. But this is something that the Targaryens repeatedly risked the Seven Kingdoms over. Aegon, when he came across to conquer, and he knew he had to get the Faith of the Seven on side, he did make a huge amount of concessions on a huge amount of different things. He made sure that he was crowned by the High Septon, acknowledging the fact that this is the person who has the moral right and ability to crown somebody the king of the Seven Kingdoms. He was very clear always to be seeking advice of the High Septon when he was doing certain things. He built a sept on one of the Sept of Remembrance. It wasn't the Great Sept yet, but he had the Sept of Remembrance built as the memorial to his beloved wife at the top of Rhaenys' Hill in King's Landing. These huge moments, he was clearly and symbolically saying, this is the faith. This is the most important of all of these faiths. More important, really, to the greater populace than my own beliefs, my own cultural faith system that he will have come across with. So it's noticeable the things that he and then his successors just decided that they weren't going to compromise on. Aegon could have set aside one of his sister wives to make life a little bit easier, and he didn't. Aenys could have decided, when he said, okay, so my 2 children are going to marry each other, he could have, when the Faith of the Seven said, oh, that's a terrible idea, you can't do that, you heretic, he could have backed down. In fact, that seems to have been what his character was, that he would back down in a second, but he didn't. Again, we get Maegor, who again married his family, one of his 6 wives. Jaehaerys married his sister. Each generation early on, this was one of the very few things that they just did not compromise on, even though it led to rebellion after rebellion, because they viewed this as so very important to perhaps being able to ride dragons. If they could not ride dragons, that their power would be gone. So that's probably why, is that they thought they cannot compromise on that in any way, shape, or form. The polygamy thing did that sort of fell by the wayside. To be honest, after Maegor, then they didn't really tend to marry more than one woman at a time, but that didn't mean that they didn't have lots of other lovers. So the incest thing was the thing which all the way through they stuck to the most, which if you were to write an essay on it, you would have to say must imply that they thought that was the most important thing in their entire culture that they brought across. Jamie McKenna, oh, hi there, Jamie, in the chat saying happy to catch a live stream. It's been too long. Hope all is well. It is. Thank you very much indeed. Having a quick flick through the chat. Kieran Grant's saying Aenys seems too indecisive. You can have all the teachings and all the counselors, but if you can't make up your mind, it won't matter. Yeah, indeed. And C. McBroom saying, never made any sense why people thought Jon would care about Dany being his aunt. As a Stark, he would not care about that because the Starks do that kind of incest as well. A lot less, though. Would Jon himself have cared? Probably. I mean, his father didn't do that sort of stuff, and it's probably likely that he thought it was, given his reaction to Jaime and Cersei, he thought that that was not a good thing. So I think that whereas historically Starks, Lannisters, Tywin married his cousin, for example, this was less frowned on it than it is in our society. I think that certainly for the Starks at that point, it was very much frowned on. So it doesn't surprise me that, well, on the show, Jon objected, and presumably in the books will as well. Let's go to a question from Callie Summers saying, I'm curious about the dynamic between Aenys and Maegor. They had personality clashes, but it seems like Maegor really acknowledged Aenys' right to rule. And except for taking Blackfyre into exile with him, Maegor never really challenged Aenys. If anything, it seemed like Visenya was the antagonistic one towards Aenys. Well, yes, Visenya was the one repeatedly to be questioning his right, his ability to rule, and championing her own son. Maegor seems broadly silent on the subject. Now, what's interesting, of course, is the fact that neither of them launch a coup before Aenys is dead. And they could have done. They had the 2 most fearsome, by a long way, the most fearsome and ancient dragons known in the world ever, in Vhagar and then Drogon. And they, not Drogon, Balerion. And they could have just squashed any opposition, but they didn't. Now, when I was talking about, I think it was last time when I was talking about Visenya and Rhaenys, I think I came to the conclusion that this was out of love for Aegon. Maybe it was a promise Visenya made Aegon. Maybe it was just a recognition of Aegon having said that Aenys was the heir, and she did not wish to go against that because that would call into question the right of the king to choose their heir, and she did not wish to do that. Whatever reason it was, during Aenys's lifetime, they did not launch a coup. And Maegor never looked like he wanted to. He seems to have, yes, been doing what his mother wanted him to do, but he happily became Hand of the King. He happily served alongside Aenys. He never, until he married a second wife, he never did anything which was against what Aenys would have particularly wanted. So, yeah, the relationship we don't hear huge amounts about, but the implication is that Maegor either didn't hate him or he just accepted his mother's decision. We're not going to go against him, not until he's dead. Question from George R. R. Tolkien, following up from this one, asking, do you have any suspicion of Maegor or Visenya possibly speeding up Aenys's death to rise to the throne quicker, like the Greens did to Viserys? So, just quickly on the Greens did with Viserys, we don't have full information on that. Certainly in House of the Dragon on the show, it seems to be that they weren't necessarily hurrying it along so much as being content that he's not actively ruling, so that they can rule while he's there, and that seems to be their general plan. In the when him actually dying, the exact moment of him dying did seem to catch them slightly by surprise, so that exactly the death was not anything, again on the show, was not a thing that was planned by them. In the books, it's left a bit more open. Perhaps there was some sort of slow poisoning happening which got rid of him, but it's never proven completely. Here we have the situation where we have Aenys going to Dragonstone and then falling ill, Visenya saying, I'll look after you, and him getting a bit better and then taking a dramatic turn for the worse. Now, what we're told is that much later, people did speculate that maybe this was Visenya hastening him on his way. But those rumors weren't there at the time. The fact that those rumors weren't there at the time does seem to suggest that perhaps these were things just invented in the wake of trying to discredit the rule of Maegor, that Maegor only became king because his mother killed the rightful king, that kind of thing. Anyone on Team Jaehaerys would have wanted that idea to have spread, because Jaehaerys gained his claim really from Aenys rather than Maegor, because Maegor named somebody else, Arya, as his heir. He did not have Jaehaerys as his heir. So Jaehaerys, if he wanted some kind of legitimacy, it was not by saying that Maegor was the right and proper heir. It's by saying that actually it comes down through the rule, the line of Aenys. We're not told that that particular argument was ever used. It was just a coup by Jaehaerys. We'll come on to him in a couple of weeks' time. But when Jaehaerys took control, this was just him taking control, regardless, and the his backers, and them deciding, you know what, yes, Maegor may have named an heir, but we're putting this person in charge. So that was what was going on there. Does this mean that that Visenya didn't hurry that death along? No, it doesn't mean that. It's the biggest clue that maybe that was what happened, was the fact that he was very young. He was 35 and he looked preternaturally old. He looked as if he was 60. So you could say this is what the countenance of somebody might be if they were quite a poorly child, never fully robust and full of health, and then had an incredibly stressful time as king in a role that he wasn't really suited for, with rebellions happening all over the place, then effectively finding himself kicked out from his throne in King's Landing, and seemingly unable to do anything about it, and going to Dragonstone, which is an acquired taste. It smells sulfurous. It's not a nice place to do your recovering, unless you're some Targaryens who seemed to enjoy it, but he, as far as we could tell, didn't. So you could make that argument that, okay, this is reasonable, but it's still, we're never given a real explanation for why he dies that young. It's just that he fell ill, and we're supposed to accept it. So is there some element of doubt? Yes, there's an element of doubt, but I don't think that's enough for us to say categorically that Visenya did do it. Let's go to question from George R.R. Tolkien, another one, saying, salutations, Robert, salutations to you too. I had a question about Alyssa Velaryon and Robar Baratheon, and how all that came to be. Okay, so this is Aenys's wife, Alyssa. She was a Velaryon, and then married Aenys when he was very young, it has to be said, but they had a lot of children. Now, what happened then was that when he died, Aenys died, she obviously then is, in her eyes, the Queen Mother, because in her eyes, her son, Aegon the Uncrowned, as he would become known, was the rightful king. However, that's not how Maegor saw it, so he captured her. She does escape eventually from Maegor, and she gets down with her children, Jaehaerys and Alicent, and she escapes to Storm's End as everything is imploding around Maegor. And going to Storm's End was a very canny move, because it is one of, if not the most indomitable fortresses in the Seven Kingdoms. It's been there for millennia, and it's got incredibly thick walls. We know that during the Robert's Rebellion, it was besieged for over a year. Didn't fall. We get lots of it has never fallen, we were told, certainly until we get to the events of A Song of Ice and Fire. And the so she's gone there, and the Baratheons, it's worth pointing out, are a really big and important family at this moment in time. We get Orys Baratheon, who was the first Baratheon, who was apparently the bastard half-brother of Aegon the Conqueror. So the two families are very close already, and they are incredibly powerful. At that moment in time, the Targaryens were the most powerful, and then underneath that were three houses who were the next most powerful, being the Hightowers, the Velaryons, and the Baratheons. Those were the next most powerful houses. So then Maegor dies, and Jaehaerys gets put in, gets crowned, basically. But he is still a child. And so Robar Baratheon, who has, because it's his, he has saved the day, and he has led the force up to take King's Landing, and he is then at this point probably the most powerful man in the entire country. He is there with Alyssa, who is the mother, and she is basically being the Queen Regent. Now, why did the two of them marry? It was the Golden Wedding, it was called. This was a huge deal, the biggest, most lavish, expensive wedding imaginable. Why did they marry? Well, why he married her, it seems very clear, is out of ambition. She's the Queen Regent, and if he marries her, what does that make him? Well, you can come up with your own title for it, really, but it basically makes him the most powerful man in the land, while the king is still a child, at least. And when we had this golden wedding, then Jaehaerys was there. He was theoretically king, but because he was underage, everybody who wanted to get things and have an audience came to Robar Baratheon. So, because they thought he was the real ruler at the time, and perhaps for a little time he was. So why did he marry? Out of ambition is the clear implication. Why did she marry him? We're not told. Perhaps it was love. It's possible. Perhaps it was a feeling of safety and comfort, that he was very powerful. Perhaps she felt obligated to, because he was so powerful, and she knew that this would secure his support for the Targaryen rule. It's not 100% clear. My best guess is that it's some combination of all of these factors. She certainly does seem to have, I mean, they had their ups and downs, but in the long run, they seem to have worked as a couple. And the geopolitical point is really quite clear. It just makes sense. Marriage was, at the time, it wasn't just a love match. This was a matter of politics, and the Targaryens staying in power was not assured. They'd had one very good and strong leader, followed by two who both brought the kingdom to the verge of collapse. So the most important thing for the Targaryens right then was to be strong and stable for a very long time. And having the Baratheons on side was definitely a good part of that, particularly as Jaehaerys and Alicent decide they want to marry each other against the wishes of Robar Baratheon, it has to be said, and that reduces the possibility of either of them marrying other people to extend the strength of the realm and the rulership through marriage. So this was political expediency, yes, possibly a bit of love, possibly a bit of thanks, possibly a bit of manipulation on his part. We're not 100% sure. Yannick Van Dyke saying, sorry, joined late. Do you think Aenys was a bastard based on liking singing and Rhaenys liking singers as well? I don't think it's clear. It's possible, but it's not clear. The rumors, once he grew up, those rumors stopped, which seems to imply that this is just a matter of, as a baby, this wasn't exactly what they're expecting. Kelly Summers, how would magic castles, Storm's End, Winterfell, Hightower, the Nightfort, etc., fare against Dragonfire? Harrenhal was just a huge pile of rocks, right? Well, not a huge pile of rocks. We're told that there was a lot of weirwood used in its construction, so it wasn't just a huge pile of rocks. How would any of those other castles fare? We don't know because we haven't seen them. But just quickly rattling through those, Winterfell most of it is a normal castle. It has to be said. What we think of as Winterfell, we think of is this big castle, but the castle was built over many centuries, bit and then another bit and then another bit and then another bit and then some walls and then another set of walls around. So when you get the descriptions of Winterfell, particularly in those early chapters of Book 1, you'll find that it's described that because things are built at different times, it's on different levels, and you go in at the ground floor of one place, don't go up or down any stairs and come out on the third floor somewhere else. That's the kind of feel. It's very kind of higgledy-piggledy. The magical bit of Winterfell seems to have been what was there first, which was the weirwood tree, the old tower, and the crypt. That is Winterfell. The castle itself is not specifically magical, and so against Dragonfire would probably fare the same way any other castle would. Storm's End was built during a time of great myth. Brandon the Builder was supposed to have been involved in it. This was supposed to be being built to withstand attacks from the gods themselves. So perhaps we know it's got magical defenses there. Melisandre talks about you can't do magic from outside in, so she had to get herself smuggled in there in order to be casting shadow babies. So the implication is that magic can't go through. Whether Dragonfire could, it's not completely clear. As for the other, well, let's just have a quick look at what other ones you said. The Night Fort seems more to be a place where bad things happened rather than a place that was built with magic, if that makes sense. So that doesn't mean there aren't magical things there. The Black Gate is there, which is clearly very magical. It's got weirwood trees there, but as a whole, as a place, it's not specifically magical. The High Tower, we are not told. Again, this is built back in the Age of Heroes and the Age of Legends, so we're not told exactly how it was built. It is obviously very, very high. Again, the legend is that Bran the Builder was involved in it, but we've not been told that it specifically has magical defenses. So out of all of those, the one I would think is most likely to have a chance would probably be Storm's End. Question from Seek and Destroy 99. Any chance of you doing a live stream of Cregan Stark in the near future? Oh, interesting question. Not in the next few weeks. So what I'm trying to do over the next few weeks for my A Song of Ice and Fire live streams is to go through the Targaryen rulers, and not just the rulers, but George R. Martin, particularly in Fire and Blood, emphasized that actually there were people who could have ruled, should have ruled, perhaps, but didn't. So I'll try and cover those people as well. It's not just the names that history remembers as the kings. There were many others as well. So that's what I'm going to be doing. After that, then, yeah, Cregan would be a great character to have a look at. So maybe I'll do a video on him at some point as well. But yeah, so definitely I will at some point, but not in the next few weeks. Reflective Rambling, picking up a question for Silky Johnson. Thank you. I love it when people do this. You do it a lot, Reflective Rambling. Thank you very much. Do you see any parallels between Aenys and Maegor and Dany and Fagon? Aenys always seemed to be... the end of that question didn't really come through. But do you see any parallels between Aenys and Maegor and Dany and Fagon? Well, ish. So I think you could probably say that we've got Maegor being he was the sort of the not the king, but over in Essos on Balerion. Dany is not currently the queen, but over in Essos with Drogon, who is set up as being an echo of Balerion. Now, the difference would be obviously that we get, and obviously there's the relation thing between them there, but the difference is that whereas Aenys and Maegor knew each other all the way through, and Maegor seems to have absolutely recognized Aenys's right to rule, and didn't move against him while he lived, when we get to Dany, will she recognize Fagon, the person claiming to be Aegon VI, as who he claims to be? Because if she does, then would she recognize or she accept that he has a greater claim than her? It's not 100% clear that she would necessarily. And he's going to be there, whereas when Maegor arrived at King's Landing on Balerion, then he was facing down the Faith of the Seven, the warrior's sons. Then Dany is going to arrive and be facing Fagon, probably, not the Faith of the Seven, who will have all probably already been defeated by Cersei. So are there echoes? Yes, but I don't think that George R. R. Martin has deliberately set those two up. And I think it's probably also worth saying the greater link is between Dany and Aegon, with her 3 dragons invading, than it is Dany and Maegor. So that's the kind of feel we've got going on there, I think. Question from Philip saying, hello, Robert. If Sons of the Dragon was adapted for TV, how many seasons do you think it would go? Where would you end each season? So this being the chapter section of Fire and Blood, which deals with Aenys and Maegor. I think that, first of all, whereas they may do this, my general take is that they would probably more likely start with Aegon's conquest and deal with that one first. But in terms of Sons of the Dragon, if they've already dealt with Aegon's conquest, they probably will end it somewhere around the end of the battle, or the war with Dorne, the letter from Prince Nymor. That would be certainly where I would end that, which has this young Prince Aenys. I would then probably, if I were to do just something about them, I would fast forward it to the point at which Aenys becomes king. We've got a 7-year period. We don't need huge amounts of time jumps there. So we could see one season very much of him taking over the rebellions against him, and maybe you could just have all of his rule in just one season. And then you go into Maegor, so you end it perhaps with his death and Maegor arriving, and then maybe you could have 1 or 2 seasons of Maegor before we get his overthrow. That could be a way they could do it. I mean, if they wished to speed through this, and I don't want them to speed through it, then you could have 1 season for the conquest, 1 season covering Aenys, 1 season covering Maegor, and then 1 season covering maybe the early years of Jaehaerys. The thing with Jaehaerys is, although he was a great king, one of the reasons why he was a great king was because broadly there was peace and prosperity and good times when he was there. Yes, there were some uprisings and things, but very broadly speaking, he was not reigning over a period of lots of action happening all at once. So yeah, as a short answer, maybe a couple of seasons. Ty Farnsworth saying, what happened to Aeria Targaryen overseas? This is, well, this is something which happened in Jaehaerys's, pardon me, Jaehaerys's reign, of course. For those who don't know the story, which is in Fire and Blood, she climbs onto the back of Balerion while still a child, effectively, and Balerion, very old, flies around a couple of times and then heads off east and comes back, and it's all very horrific. He's got this huge, Balerion's got this huge gash in his side, and she has got really quite horrible worm but fiery things under her skin. They went to Valyria. It's the short answer. This is what Septon Bath speculates, and it seems to make absolute sense. They went there, and whatever is there has survived the equivalent of a nuclear explosion. When the doom of Valyria, an entire peninsula, just exploded. What is left there will be the remains of whatever genetic experiments with fiery monsters that the Valyrians were doing, which they do seem to have been doing, that could survive that. So, yeah, horrible things happened, and it was in Valyria. Let's go. I think that's me caught up on questions in the chat. Let's go to a question from Catherine Fursith, saying, "Hi Robert, Aenys rode the dragon Quicksilver. This dragon only had 2 riders in all and died in battle against Maegor and Balerion while being ridden by Prince Aegon. This battle happened over or close to the God's Eye, leading me to think of the other famous battle there between Aemond and Daemon. Do you see any common thread between these 4 dragons and or their riders?" Not a strong one is the honest answer. I think that if anything, it's a sort of a flip, in that we've got Maegor as king against Aegon, who claims to be king, and they are on these 2 great dragons, and they fight. It's not over the God's Eye. This is the battle under the God's Eye. So it seems to be over ground rather than over the God's Eye itself. When you get the battle between Daemon and Aemond, then that's the second sons. These aren't the kings themselves fighting. This is the second sons, and so it's got they're set up as similar characters, whereas Maegor and Aegon are set up as very different characters. So it's almost a contrast between the two, is that we're being invited to see, first of all, this very one-sided battle, which is won by the most obvious and biggest and toughest dragon, to a battle where the bigger and tougher dragon actually loses. So we're sort of seeing them in opposite, rather than an echo. And I mean, I do wonder sometimes, George R. R. Martin, if we had to critique him, he does rely a lot on this idea of echoes in the story resounding through history. So we're looking for it. We're always looking for, what does this is this foreshadowing for something else? Is this an echo from something else? Here, perhaps he's deliberately twisting it around so it looks like the opposite. But no, I personally, I don't think that he was trying to make a particular point there in with those 4 dragons and people. Let's go to a question from Callie Summers, what, if anything, were Aenys's most important accomplishments, aside from naming Maegor's hand? Well, this I actually had to think about for a while, because if you look at it, he didn't do much right, honestly. He had those 4 rebellions, and he personally didn't deal with any of them. You could claim that they were put down during his time, but it wasn't really his doing. He made some rather weak decisions. He let Maegor go away with Blackfyre, but then he decided to go ahead with the decision to let his children marry each other, which led to a huge faith uprising. And then he just basically ran away to Dragonstone when he could have gotten his dragon and done some serious damage. He didn't make any particularly strong decisions, but that's not what his strength was as a person. So I think that we shouldn't, when we're looking at his greatest accomplishments, we should probably not look at the kind of things that Aegon the Conqueror or Maegor would look at as being great accomplishments. We should probably judge him on his own merits, which is as a human being who seemed to have been a nice and good and upright human being, and say he seems to have raised a nice family. He seems to have raised a good family. A lot of the characters that we then think of as being, well, yeah, they were some of the good Targaryens, Jaehaerys and Alicent, they came from this distinct line. They came from, they were his children. So I think that if we were to say what were his greatest accomplishments, it was the fact that he raised good children. And as much as we might want to critique him as a king, as a human being, I think that's very hard to sort of argue against myself. Martin S., do you think House of the Dragon has a chance to match the popularity and success of Game of Thrones during the show's best years? No, and I don't mean that in a bad way in the slightest. Game of Thrones was a one-off. Game of Thrones was a phenomenon. This could be the biggest show on TV without it coming close to where Game of Thrones was at in terms of cultural impact. If you're talking about how good in terms of quality, yeah, it's possible. Depends on where they go with this in the next season. So for me, I that was my favorite show of the year. There were a lot of good shows actually last year, but I thought that this was my favorite show of the year. My general take was that it was like solid all the way through. It didn't sort of go up and down so much in episodes. I think that almost every episode was a really good one. Where can they go from here is by having more of those absolute wonderful moments, which, if you're thinking about, there were some fantastic moments in House of the Dragon. You think about episode 8, when you got Viserys coming into the throne room. That was absolutely amazing. The cinematography when we get Vhagar just snapping down there after in the Battle over Shipbreaker Bay, just like taking out the smaller dragon, then that was amazing. But they need more of these kinds of moments. I think the season 1 necessarily had a slightly disjointed first few episodes. As somebody who's read the book many times, I knew exactly what was going on, but I know lots of people who weren't au fait with the story, who were like, oh, okay, so now we've got new actors for these people. Who are those people again? And it did feel a little bit jarring, I think, for some people. So my hope is that it can improve once we're settled down into this proper cast, and the cast we're going to have going forward. That's the point at where it can just keep on going up notch by notch. I don't think it will ever reach the same cultural level as Game of Thrones, but I think that it has the potential to be as good artistically, but it needs to take the next, for me, it needs to take the next step up, which isn't a critique. I think it was a very good show, by the way. It's just that when Game of Thrones was good, it was very, very good. And when it was bad, it was bad. Let's go to another question from Candy Summers saying, it's just a side question. Was George R. R. Martin trolling us with the name? It fits the Targaryen naming patterns, but it wouldn't surprise me if he just thought it was funny to let people figure out a way to pronounce it, like the planet Uranus. Yes, he does. He has quite a puckish sense of humor is the way I normally describe it. He finds a lot of things quite amusing. As a childish is probably the wrong way of saying it. Naming characters after Muppets requires a certain, in a very serious world, it takes a certain sense of humor. I mean, I have to admit, I did a video, you can probably find it somewhere, where I pronounced Aenys in a slightly different way, and a lot of people found it quite amusing. Is this deliberate on his part? Yes, probably not. But if it turns out it is, then yeah, it wouldn't surprise me hugely. Would he have? Yeah, I don't think so, but maybe not. And Kelly Summers actually just coming back on that point about his greatest accomplishments. He's saying, I totally agree. I should have just said accomplishments as king. Aenys was one of the Targa kings I would have gotten along with best. But if you rule a nation, you've got to have a higher standard. Yeah, absolutely. Carl Karsnak saying, House of the Dragon is micro, Game of Thrones is macro. Different stories with different perspectives. Fun to see both. Yeah, so they have focused in House of the Dragon, season 1 necessarily. It's on King's Landing, little bit Dragonstone, little bit on Driftmark, and then some sort of special guest star appearances from Stepstones and things like that. But broadly speaking, it's just in this very small, constrained part of southeast Westeros. That should change in season 2. We should start seeing more. We should see the Eyrie. We should see Winterfell. We may well see down into the Reach with Old Town. That would be pretty fantastic. Expand out geographically. But A Song of Ice and Fire works as a novel series because it is operating on a number of different levels in a way that Fire and Blood doesn't, because it is written as a history book. So yeah, I think the micro and macro is an interesting way of putting it. The story can be as engaging, but there are more levels to the story in A Song of Ice and Fire, which can play into, or did play into, Game of Thrones, the TV show. Let's go to a question from Shelley J just in the chat saying, haha, my question was going to be, are we sure we're pronouncing it right? I don't think we can be sure. I have to admit, I only changed the way I pronounce, because he's a ruler we often don't talk about. And I always used to pronounce Rhaenys, until I then had to suddenly start talking about Aenys, and realized that, okay, if we're going to be pronouncing these in the same way, then perhaps I need to change the way I pronounce Rhaenys to Rhaenys. Mara Lee question saying, why did Maegor the Cruel end up next as king rather than King Aenys' own son? He took it by force, is the short answer. So Aenys had an heir. His heir was hidden. Basically, the Faith Uprising, which had happened because of Aenys' weak rule, had kept his son boxed in Westerlands, so he could not come and claim the throne for his own and Maegor swooped in and claimed it for his own. This was strength of arms. When he did, suddenly, when Aegon did come, as we've already mentioned, Maegor just took him out straight away. So this was just a matter of strength of arms. And it's worth noting how, as much as we like to think of this who's next in line of succession business, that's not how at any point the Targaryens have passed the reign on from one to another. Aegon I took the throne by force. He did pass it on to his first son, but his first son, Aenys, did not get to pass it on to his son because it then got taken by force by Maegor. Maegor named an heir, but it did not pass to Maegor's heir because Jaehaerys came and took it by force. And then we get Viserys named his heir. His heir did not claim it, could not be queen except for that 6-month period because Aegon II claimed it by force. This was how the Targaryens operated. It was not a very clear, this person's next in line, therefore everybody recognizes that that person comes, should be the new monarch. Marley also saying, King Aenys reminds me of King Viserys in personality and how they both ruled. How much of this has laid the groundwork in King Aenys's half-brother Maegor succeeding him to the throne? As cruel as Maegor was, why did he wait till after his half-brother's death to take over as king with his mother's help? I'm surprised he didn't try to raise arms against his half-brother during the 4 uprisings. Well, I think we've covered the second part of that already, actually, but the first part, the link across to Viserys, is a really interesting one. So they are both described in the same sort of way in terms of their not wanting people to dislike them. They're not wanting to make clear decisions. Viserys did very clearly want to have Rhaenyra as his heir and stuck by that, even though he knew that that caused some opposition. But he always tried to prevent the arguments. So that was his approach. The key difference, I think, is not so much how they ruled. They seem to have had broadly similar temperaments. But it was how powerful the Targaryens were at the time. When Aenys took over, yes, Aegon had been there and had conquered, but they had not yet fully subjugated the 7 kingdoms. The invasion was still in living memory. People could still remember living under a different ruler. There were uprisings happening all over the place, at least partly because of that. So when Viserys becomes king, we've had over a century of Targaryen rule. So when he is there dithering around a little bit, there isn't so much for him to actually be dealing with. He did have, in the same way that Maegor went off and for a while did the troubleshooting for Aenys, Viserys's brother Daemon went off and did the troubleshooting for him. So there is a kind of a link going on there, but Viserys could get away with it. And when I say get away with it, this was described as being the apex of Targaryen rule under Viserys, not Jaehaerys. It was under Viserys where they were at their most powerful. The difference between them is therefore how powerful the Targaryens are at that point. Martin S. saying, I also think Game of Thrones during its good years is extremely hard to match, hence my last question. Still, I was very positively surprised by House of the Dragon, which I also consider the best show I watched from last year. Yeah, I think... yeah, I don't think I would disagree with that. There were quite a few good shows. I did a sort of awards thing over Christmas, which I'm thinking of making annual. I'll probably put a little more structure into it next time. But just asking people in one of my live streams on Twitter, what out of the shows that they'd seen, what was the best show they saw, who was the best actor they saw, the best ensemble acting, etc., etc., all the way through. And House of the Dragon did come out top of that. From memory, honourable mentions also to Andor, which I have seen and I thought was excellent. Also Severance, which I haven't seen, and Better Call Saul, which I haven't seen, but both of them got a lot of people saying they were excellent. So those are recommendations for you from last year. Recommendation for this year, by the way, so far, The Last of Us, 3 episodes in, excellent, on HBO. I've not played the video game, so maybe I'm not as up with all of the background and can't see all of the differences. But from what I've been told, people who have played the game love this adaptation. Certainly the best video game to TV show adaptation I've ever seen. So do go and check that out. It is a sort of a surviving after the zombie apocalypse show, which has been done a lot of times, but it's done in a really interesting way. So I would recommend that if you've not seen that. I'm also just coming to an end of his Dark Materials, which is also excellent. Let's look in the chat. Reflective Rambling saying, says the person who covers The Witcher. Yeah, so The Witcher, I did also watch The Witcher Blood Origin over Christmas, which I'm trying to work out how to politely say this. I was not as a huge fan of. Let's put that way. Matthias saying, yes, The Last of Us is absolutely amazing. Knowing the games, I'm so happy with it so far. Kelly Summers asking how horror-y is The Last of Us. I'm not usually a fan of the more scary stuff. The bits that I've seen, it's scary, but not gruesome. Jennifer Allstone's pointing out Legend of Vox Machina, always mispronounce that word. Vox Machina is on Prime, so season 2 is now, or at least the first 2-3 episodes I think are out. That's a lot of fun. If you've not seen that. Ryan Milky 14 saying, surely Willow will win all the awards ever made. Joking, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't the best. Yeah, I mean, I've only watched the first episode of that so far. I have to admit, it was fun. I wouldn't say it's up for huge amounts of awards. I've seen McBroom saying need to start Severance since so many people said it was good. Yeah, I've only heard really good things. When Angry Pagan saying, do you think we'll see more personality from the dragons in House of the Dragon? Yes. So this was one of the things that they were trying really hard to do in season 1. And I have a huge amount of sympathy for them in that they had to introduce a huge cast that was changing through the season, as well as dragons. So they deliberately only really introduced us to like 1 or 2 dragons at a time, so we could start to get used to each of those dragons. Will we get to see their personalities more? We've started to see some of the personalities already. The most important thing, and at some point soon I will make a video on this because I think it's really interesting, is out of all of the, I'm not even going to call them book to show law changes, because I don't, this is, I think, a more of a law expansion or clarification. This is one of the ones that I really like the most, is this concept of dragons having free will. We knew they had free will already. This isn't new. This is why I'm saying it's more of a lore expansion. We knew that, but certainly on Game of Thrones, they never really showed it. when Dany's riding her dragon, she seems to be able to control it pretty well. Other than that first time Jon's riding a dragon, the Night King was riding a dragon. Nobody ever seemed to have much of a problem riding dragons. But here, it is hard work riding a dragon. It will not necessarily do what you want. It will have a mind of its own. So that, I think, is really interesting and important. And in terms of individual dragon personalities, we will get more, I'm sure of that. But Fire and Blood, although it gives us some of the dragon personality, it's often just a few words per dragon, which is not huge amounts to go on. So exactly how much they can show us for each dragon, I do not know, but I'm looking forward to finding out. Andrew K saying, I need to learn how to use the polls on here so we can vote on this. Yes, absolutely. That's one of the many things I need to learn how to do on here. For a YouTuber, my knowledge of how to use YouTube is rather limited. Amy Smith saying, George R. Martin quote here, I knew a lot of words that I had never heard spoken aloud. I found I was pronouncing a lot of these words wrong. Pronounce the names of my characters however you like. Yes, thank you for that quote. It's one I've used, certainly the last bit there, I've used several times. Pronounce the names of my characters however you like. He is not that bothered. He's not a philologist. He's not a linguist like, say, Tolkien was. If you've ever actually heard him speaking about his characters, he pronounces them, some of them in ways that you wouldn't expect. If you ever hear him talking about the Dothraki, for example, it sounds quite strange to our ears as we know them as the Dothraki. And he loved Roy Dotrice. I've got a question about Roy Dotrice in just a moment, but Roy Dotrice, who did the narrations for the audio narrations for Song of Ice and Fire, he pronounces a lot of the names very differently, like Pattaya Baelish, or Jaqen H'ghar and things like that. And George R. Martin doesn't really seem to care that much. So does it mean that he's trolling us? If we're going back to that earlier question, I mean, I think, yeah, in the light of that sentence, probably not, as I said earlier. But yeah, don't. We shouldn't go too far down the rabbit hole of trying to say George R. Martin wants this to be pronounced in this way, because he cares a lot less than we do. Andrew Case saying, with The Last of Us, I'm impressed with how competent the people involved seem to be, particularly cinematography, direction, emotional elements, etc. Yeah, it seems high quality across the piece. Then we get Reflective Rambling saying, we need to get you to start Arcane and Vox Machina for fun. Yeah, Arcane, I've seen the first 4 episodes and really liked. And I really must get around to watching the rest of it. The problem was that towards the end of last year, second half of last year, a lot of TV shows happened all at the same time that I had to be watching. So I kind of put Arcane down for a while, but I do need to go back to that. Lisa Dennis saying, no question, just to thank you for the fantastic content. Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate that. Jenks Anro saying, Arcane is bonkers good. That's good. Malcolm McQueen saying, well, I don't really want to go down the Henry Cavill rabbit hole. What are your thoughts on him as Daemon Blackfire? Seems appropriate because he's supposed to be handsome, well-liked, etc. Yeah, he could do. I mean, my pause was partly a timing issue. We know that House of the Dragon, the intention is for House of the Dragon to be an anthology show, meaning that they are wanting to, once they finish doing the Dance of the Dragons, they will do a different bit in Targaryen history and then another bit in Targaryen history, all under the same banner of House of the Dragon. But we also know that they have made a decision. Everything's up in the air with HBO, as with so many other kind of streaming providers and the like at the moment. But they made an executive decision that they didn't want to go far, in the short term at least, from George R.R. Martin's writings. They got stung not just by the ending of Game of Thrones, but also from the Blood Omen, the spin-off that they did a pilot for, cost them $35 million, and they didn't like. And that, I mean, one day I really want to see what that pilot looked like, because it could have been, well, it would have been fascinating, but that's locked somewhere in HBO's archives, never to be seen, I suspect. But anyway, they then made the decision, we've got George R.R. Martin here, we've signed him up to this allegedly $50 million contract for the next few years. We might as well stick to things that he's already written and finished, which is why they went to Fire and Blood and The Dance of the Dragons. And it probably means that next for House of the Dragon, they will go back and do something like Aegon the Conqueror. The Blackfire Rebellions, Daemon Blackfire, that's only going to be in Fire and Blood Part 2. So my instinct is we wouldn't see that. I mean, I'm plucking numbers out of the air, but we probably wouldn't see that for another 10 years or so, given the fact that they've got to get through The Dance of the Dragon and probably something else. And George R. R. Martin will have to write Fire and Blood Part 2, which he shouldn't do. That doesn't mean he's not going to, but he shouldn't do until at least he's written The Winds of Winter, and probably also written A Dream of Spring. So that's a long way off. Could he fit the role? Yes. Pardon me. I think that he would work very well as Maegor. It goes against his typecast as being like the hero good guy, but I think Maegor, big and bulky, charismatic, but dark. I think he can carry that off. The kind of the Geralt thing, but darker. He could definitely do that. Let's go to a question from where are we up to? One Angry Pagan saying the Inheritance Cycle books are excellent in terms of the dragons. Just a shame that the Eragon film was not very good. Yeah, actually, I've got that up on my bookshelf over there. The Martin S saying, are the dragons of George R. R. Martin's world tamed like horses as a species overall and individually? Were they wild at some point? Well, I think it's not quite a matter of being tamed and wild. Viserys is very clear that they cannot be controlled. A bond develops between the rider and the dragon, but that does not mean that the rider controls the dragon. They are independent. In terms of getting that bond in the first place, though, there does seem to, in some instances, have this feel of taming a wild horse. In particular, and it'd be fascinating to see how they do this on House of the Dragon, when we have Nettles and Sheepstealer, the way that she got close to Sheepstealer was by leaving out sheep for the dragon to eat, and then each time getting a little bit closer when leaving a sheep until right up by the dragon, and then you could bond with the dragon. So that was how that one seems to work, and others have gone through similar routes. So there does seem to be an element of it, but George R. R. Martin is very clear that these are magical beings. They're not like horses or any other beings we have here, and they're intelligent, not in a kind of a human intelligence way, not in a way that Tolkien's dragons like Smaug are intelligent, but they have independent thought. Were they wild at some point? This is going back into the mists of time. It depends on your take on that, whether the Valyrians or their predecessors kind of invented them, which is possible, or whether they existed before then. it's never made clear, and George R. R. Martin doesn't want us to have all the answers. He likes the idea of ancient history being mysterious. Jonathan Gaza with the super sticker there. Thank you very much indeed. Simon Schaffner saying, on the dragon topic, do you think there will be any casual dragon scenes? Someone just chilling with their dragon as buds. I don't know where I want to see that so bad. Yeah, so I mean, I hope so. There might be. We got I think the closest we got were a few things with Daemon and Caraxes, where he's just sort of like there, and you know, when how Daemon shows his love is by resting his forehead on somebody else's forehead. He does that with Caraxes. He sort of puts his head down there and sort of stroking the dragon and saying soothing things in Valyrian. So we did get a few scenes of that. Might we get that this time? It's possible, but I'm just trying to think. The biggest dragon scenes this time around should be the dragon seeds claiming their dragons. And so presumably at the end of that process, we should have people with dragons. And so we should get some of that. But just hanging out, if they're going to keep the episodes as tight as they did in season 1, then maybe not so much. But yeah, Daemon as a character establishment, that I really thought that worked well. Mattia, highly recommending finishing Arcane. Thank you. A reflective rambling, picking up for Amy Smith. Was there any talk of the... thank you very much. Was there any talk of the Iron Throne rejecting Aenys? I know other rulers are mentioned being cut by it and seen as unworthy. I can't remember that there was, to be honest. This is... I mean, we get Aegon that one instance when he got the letter from Prince Nymor. Maegor definitely was. We have others like Rhaenyra and Aerys II. Aenys, we're not told that he did. I mean, I did a video on this for those who didn't see it, where I put up the possibility. I mean, I think that the simplest possibility is that this is just one of those tales that are told to justify your position. Ah, that person got cut by the Iron Throne, therefore they're unworthy because this person thinks that somebody else should be sitting on the Iron Throne. That's the most likely scenario. But I did, in this video, I did put forward the idea that this might be connected to Aegon's original dream, the Song of Ice and Fire, this thing that Viserys passes down, the idea that it is the role of the Targaryens to be holding the Seven Kingdoms together, to be ruling, to keep the family together effectively. And therefore the Iron Throne judges Targaryens not by whether they are good in some moral sense, but whether or not they're fulfilling their role in that, which is an interesting approach, because then you say Aegon got cut by the Iron Throne only once, and that was the moment that he accepted that he was not going to be able to conquer Dorne, so he was not going to be able to rule a united Westeros. That was when he got cut. Maegor got cut not earlier. He got cut basically when his family had turned against him. Rhaenyra got cut basically when she rejected peace. Alicent basically offers her peace and she says no, and that's the point at which she gets cut. So you can go through and say the kings and queens of Westeros get cut by the Iron Throne when they are not living up to the standard that they should be living up to. But no, and Aenys, feel free, if somebody has got a copy of Fire and Blood in front of them, feel free to have a look through. I can't remember that there are any specific references to it. That doesn't mean that there weren't, but I can't remember any specific references off the top of my head. Question from Martin S. Have to hugely praise Tolkien in terms of his invented names. Generally, they are better than the names of any other fantasy author I know of by far. Probably his linguistic background showing. Yeah, so, I mean, Tolkien, with his linguist, I mean, it's linguist professorship, not just linguistic background. He understood language and he understood the meanings of things. And so you can go, if you go to Tolkien Gateway, which is a fantastic, it's basically a wiki of Tolkien, and for every character you can go down and there's an etymology section and you can see where the names for each of these different characters came from, and it's a fascinating thing to sort of go through. And yes, every single name had a meaning to it in some way, which 90% of which would have been lost on the average reader, I suspect, but it would come across with the feel of a name. Samwise, the name itself, it conveys a feeling to us. Similarly, Pippin, Merry, we understand a bit about their characters by their names, in the same way that we get Saruman or Sauron, even without using the g's and kups and z's and things like that a lot of people rely on for the names of bad guys. Tolkien didn't need to use that because he understood language so well. Silver Scale, no questions. Just wanted to thank you, Robert, and the Song of Ice and Fire fam for these live streams. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Carl Kosnak talking about Tolkien names. Tolkien generally started with a name and worked backwards into their storyline. Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is it's quite funny sometimes when you get early ideas before he's really workshopped his way through a name. So for those who don't know, Strider for a long time in his early drafts was called Trotter, and that would have been a very different name, a very different feel to it. Strider works obviously so much better. And Bilbo, I think, would have been Bungo Baggins. There's he has a lot of character names that changed clearly for the better while he was doing it. He just had almost a placeholder. You can understand where the Trotter goes and turns into Strider, and you can see how how Strider is better than Trotter. Let's go to two questions. I've got two more questions from my patrons, and then now is a good time to drop any more questions into the chat, because I'll try and get through quite a few more of them. Lady Pushkins saying, hi Robert, if you could have any, and we're sort of broadly moving beyond Aenys now. Feel free to put more Aenys questions in there if you've got them, but happy to take wider questions as well. Hi Robert, if you could have any prop, costume, etc. from the Song of Ice and Fire shows, what would it be and why? I would love that Cat's Paw Dagger. That would be amazing, because it pops up all over the place and I think it just looks really cool. That would be the one that I would pick. I mean, it'd be fun to have the Iron Throne, wouldn't it? But yeah, if I had to pick any, it would probably be that one. And then Alhad saying, which Tyrion do you like more, Peter Dinklage or Roy Dotrice? With a re-listen, in my opinion, it's Roy Dotrice's. So Roy Dotrice, again, to say, is the guy who narrated the audiobooks in A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, the first thing to say in responding is to note, of course, Peter Dinklage's Tyrion is based, it's the show Tyrion, whereas Roy Dotrice is doing the book Tyrion. And before going across the characterizations, book Tyrion is way more layered than show Tyrion. I love show Tyrion, but book Tyrion is way more layered, a lot darker as well. You do find yourself siding with him, but then also recoiling from a lot of the things that he does. But in terms of the voice and characterization, Roy Dotrice, he uses a lot of different accents, and I think probably some of them for English speakers from the British Isles probably notice a lot of the differences a lot more than those from elsewhere, who might just hear different variations on a sort of a British accent. He starts out with Tyrion being very Welsh, which doesn't quite work for me. It has to be said, slightly different accent has to be said to his siblings. I understand why Welsh, because the Westerlands are very broadly, loosely based on Wales. That's geographically, if we're looking at Westeros as being broadly a bit like the Great Britain with Ireland squashed onto it. The bit of is the Westlands is the bit that matches roughly to Wales, so I understand it. But for me, that doesn't quite work. Tyrion comes across better, I think, with the kind of accent that Peter Dinklage brought to it, which was a lot more sort of RP, which is a traditional upper class kind of accent, which is who he is as a character. He was brought up that way, as being upper class, one of the elite, despite the fact that he is looked down upon, not just physically, but figuratively, by pretty much everybody he meets. So I think if you're just talking in terms of the accent, I prefer Peter Dinklage's, but in terms of the character, I prefer the one in A Song of Ice and Fire. Let's go to some questions from Chaos Ballerina, saying, any hints that Visenya doubted Aenys's lineage? Also off topic, but Swifty, I assume this is Altschwift X, discovered that the German publishers gave Connington the words "a fierce and loyal friend," which I think is the first we've heard. Okay, I'll talk about that one in just one moment. The first bit, though, any hints that Visenya doubted Aenys's lineage? She didn't voice them. She seems to have voiced her objections to him on the basis of his ability to be king, rather than whether or not he was a bastard. My guess is that whatever her suspicions may have been, if she did have suspicions, that would have immediately, if she'd gone down that route, that would immediately have said that Aegon himself had been and the people at the time would have thought he's being cuckolded, therefore that would have brought him down in people's eyes, and she was all about the strength of the Targaryens, and so she would not wish to bring him down in anyone's eyes. So I suspect that even if she thought it, she did not want to be making those accusations. As for that second bit, Alt-Shift X, lovely guy, his alter ego, Swift X, is not always to be trusted, that guy. So I have no idea whether this is a true, assuming this is true, this is the first I've heard of it. But the German publishers gave Connington's the words "a fierce and loyal friend." Yeah, I think that's the first we've heard of that, but where has this come from? I do not know, is the short answer. That would be a really interesting, for Jon Connington, that is that does match up to his backstory with Rhaegar. But although it's, I mean, he seems to have been in love with Rhaegar, basically, as far as we can tell. Yeah, so that does kind of match up. Whether that works for the Conningtons as a whole, I don't know. Amy Smith saying, living in accent ignorant bliss as an Australian. Yeah, it's probably a good place. Chaos Ballerina saying, what was Aenys's relationship with Aegon the First like? So it was, well, it seems to have been good, as in this is his father. So he seems to have never wavered in wanting him to be king after him. But very few people, basically Aegon, we talked about him a couple of weeks ago, very few people understood him. He seemed very much a closed book. He went off and did his own things. He went off on his progresses around the land. He went to Dragonstone a lot. He seems to have been quite an absent father, which doesn't mean that he disliked his son, but it just seems that he wasn't there much. Yeah, a few other people talk about the accents. The accents that, I mean, I'm not saying that the accents in Game of Thrones to an sort of a British-based English speaker, they don't always make sense on Game of Thrones itself, the TV show. It's very noticeable. You get the North does, broadly speaking, they have northern accents. Sean Bean's accent is he's from Sheffield, which is sort of northish in the UK. Mark Addy similarly is from that part of the world, but he's Robert Baratheon, and he seemed to have a quite similar accent, but came from the Stormlands, which is right down in the south. Then you get people like Davos, who has a Geordie accent from the north, the far northeast of England, just south of the wall, which doesn't at all seem to make sense. So the accents, broadly, from a British person's perspective, the accents often map across quite well, but not always. And for what it's worth, I think the accents, they seem that they were good. Then they suited the characters. So me complaining about whether or not they mapped on exactly to what they would be if Westeros were actually England, I think is probably a little unfair of me. But let's go to Jonathan Garza saying, do you think there was a difference between the dragons born on Dragonstone versus ones born in the Dragon Pit? Well, the Maesters certainly put this out. Is this the idea that the Dragon Pit stunted growth of dragons, and perhaps this is what led to the end of the dragons? That, however, does seem to be them trying to cover their tracks, because there doesn't seem to be much of if a dragon is allowed to come out and fly and gets fed lots, then that doesn't seem to make so much difference. What you do see is in A Song of Ice and Fire, there is a clear difference between Drogon, who does, this is in A Dance with Dragons, does fly around and is free, and the other two dragons which are trapped, and they are smaller than Drogon, because Drogon gets a chance to be flying out and around and free. So is there a difference? Yes, but not as pronounced as the Maesters might want you to think. One angry pagan saying, if they're going to go ahead with the reimagining on the Eragon film, would you be interested in doing videos on the inheritance cycle? Possibly. Yes. Malcolm McQueen saying Maegor's defense of his second marriage was basically what later became exceptionalism. Should Aenys have defended his brother's actions? He had to deal with it later his kid's marriage. Yeah, so exceptionalism was used. This was what Jaehaerys ended up doing. It was he basically came out with this proclamation, Targaryen exceptionalism, which said Targaryens are different to everyone else, and we don't have to follow the rules that everybody else does. So we can do incest, we can do polygamy if we want. We're basically above the moral teachings of the Faith of the Seven. And then he sent this out with these people to the corners of Westeros just to make this case. And that was where they ended up. The faith weren't strong enough at that point to be opposing it, so that's where they ended up. But yes, this was, although it wasn't codified before then, this was definitely what the Targaryens believed and what they used as their defense. Aegon probably never felt that he had to defend his own marriages. He just, because he had a massive dragon who could burn down castles. So I don't think he felt he needed to do it. But Maegor was that, yeah, well, I'm a Targaryen. I can do what I want. It's interesting when you get to House of the Dragon, when you had Daemon and young Rhaenyra, when he was sort of showing her the dark and seedy side of King's Landing, he basically gives her a little spiel that says, you're a Targaryen. You can do whatever you want. Morally, it doesn't matter. You can marry someone, have lovers on the side. This is entirely up to you. You don't answer to anybody. And he doesn't frame it in the same way, but it's the same kind of feel. Targaryens are different. We don't have to obey the same moral laws that everybody else does. And as he is set up on the TV show as being the most Valyrian of the Targaryens, he's the one who speaks Old Valyrian the most. He seems to have a strong relationship with his dragon. He's handing out gifts of Valyrian steel. He gets married in the Old Valyrian style. All of this kind of stuff, he's being held up as that. He is the person who is holding on to this idea of this kind of Targaryen exceptionalism. Bailey de Bruyne saying, do you think Visenya was actually helping Aenys when he was sick, and all the bad stuff about her is just made up by the Maesters to make her look bad? I think, yeah, I'm 50-50 on this one, is my honest answer. And the weight of the evidence is that he was only 35 and he died very young. People do die when they're 35, so that's in and of itself, that is not conclusive. But the fact that she was not accused of this at the time is also, I think, quite telling. And it was only later, when people are probably trying to discredit Maegor's rule, that these kinds of things came up. That is, I think, quite indicative that she probably was trying to help him. Carl Carlsnock saying, Glimby and Swifty had a fun live stream this morning reviewing International Song of Ice and Fire book covers. I did not know that. I'll go and check that one out. Let's go to question from Martin S. How does Glorfindel, this is a Tolkien question, Glorfindel in the Third Age compare to George R. R. Martin's various characters in terms of swordsmanship? Probably favorably against most of them, I'd guess. What about Aragorn? Well, Glorfindel in the Third Age is almost angelic as a being when he comes back, because he's been in Valinor and is still filled with it. And when Frodo sees him, he was, if you've only watched the films, not read the books, then Glorfindel is a character you missed out on, because they replaced a lot of what he did with Arwen. So when Arwen's on the horse getting Frodo over to Rivendell, that is Glorfindel, basically. That's one of his moments in the book. But when Frodo sees him, because he's sort of half in the Shadow Realm at the time, he actually sees him for what he's like, as this bright, shining creature. So yeah, he is over and above. This guy in the First Age took down a Balrog. So in the Third Age, he's and in the Third Age, the Witch King and the Nazgul, it's just said in passing, but you look at what happens. They hear, there are three of them, I think, on a bridge, holding a bridge. They're trying to capture the hobbits before they get to Rivendell. Glorfindel comes up and basically gets them off of the bridge. The Witch King discovers this, and he rides with the Black Riders a day to the south across the river, and then a day north again, 2 days out of his way, simply to avoid facing Glorfindel. That's how impressive he is. So yeah, he could take anybody in A Song of Ice and Fire. Aragorn, exceptional fighter. George R. R. Martin, I think, has gone on record as saying that he thinks that Jaime could beat Aragorn. I mean, I think that's debatable. But Aragorn is a very good fighter. Is he the greatest fighter in Middle-earth? Probably not. I would hold up Gimli as being a greater fighter than him myself. But he does have a very impressive sword in the way that Jaime also does later on, obviously. So, yeah, I think that one's pretty close. And a question from Jimith, although I didn't see a question attached to that. Just seeing if I can see one in the chat. If you do have a question attached to that one, then just flag it up in the chat, and one of the moderators, I'm sure, will pick it up. Thank you, Victoria Gill. Say IDG making spicy cough a positive. I'm home to see you live. Thanks for the content. Well, if you've got a cough, well, I hope you're feeling better soon. But thank you very much. I hugely appreciate it. Grey Zephyr, similarly, didn't see a question attached to that, but thank you very much. I do hugely appreciate it. Jochen Hagar saying, I never much cared for Glorfindel. I much prefer Zinfandel. I see what you did there. One Angry Pagan saying, where do we think George will take Arya's character in the next book? The same as Game of Thrones? Roughly. So she is obviously in the books, she's in Braavos being trained by the Faceless Men. The pre-release chapter we have from The Winds of Winter, Mercy, for her, basically has her, she gets caught up with the circus troupe, which she does in the book. She gets placed there, but she sees somebody who's on her kill list in this chapter, and basically goes rogue and kills him. We know last time when she did that, went rogue and killed somebody she shouldn't have done, then the Faceless Men knew and found out about it. The best guess is that that's going to happen again. She is on the same arc in as much as this is a matter of her identity. Where George R. Martin is taking it with her, she has gone to the Faceless Men to become no one, but she is not going to become no one. She is going to reclaim her Stark name and identity. She is all the way through the story, right from at the end of book one, she is being changed. She's literally having, Yoren is there cutting her hair, denying her name, changing her gender, I mean, calling her boy, and basically saying, you're not a Stark, you're a nobody, you're going to join the Night's Watch. He is changing her identity away from what it was. And then all the way through the next books, she takes on so many different identities and names, but deep down inside, she's still a Stark. And when she gets to Braavos and she joins the House of Black and White, the representation, the physical representation of her Starkishness is the Sword Needle. This is the one thing she's managed to keep hold of. She lost it for a bit, but the things that she's managed to keep hold of, she hides it, because she will want to reclaim it at some point. And so the arc takes her to reclaiming her Stark identity. Now, will her leaving Braavos be the same in the books as it was on the show? Almost certainly not the same, but the same kind of feel is that she's going to end from there and come out back to Westeros with a whole new load of skills, and also with her Stark identity reclaimed. Let's have a quick flick through the chat. Joking Hagar talking about his Dark Materials and what do people think. I'm really enjoying his Dark Materials. I think it's got better each season, to be honest, and I think it's an excellent, it's a slow burn, but I think it's an excellent adaptation. Reflective rambling is there. Picking up for Grey as Zephyr. Hey, sorry, are there any ethereal figures for the dwarves like Glorfindel? Are any of the Durins ethereal? Not ethereal, but yeah, the Durins, for those who don't know, the dwarves in Tolkien's world, the dwarves, Durin's folk, the Longbeards, the ones that we see much. There are 7 tribes of dwarves. We only really deal with one of them, but they have their first. The founder, effectively, is Durin the First, and then they believe he gets reincarnated 6 times until Durin the 7th is going to be the one who leads them back to Moria, and that's where they stay for the rest of the time, digging and doing things that dwarves like to do. So this reincarnation feel is definitely there, and Durin the Deathless is this feel. So it's not ethereal in the same way that you would get someone like Glorfindel, because he's returned from Valinor. It's not like that, but it is. They're different, but they do have their own kind of spirituality. Reflective memory saying dig a tunnel. Yep, absolutely. Martin S saying, I think George R. R. Martin has written a story after the popular vote about Jaime beating Randolph Thor from the Winds of from the Wheel of Time. That borders on the absurd. So I wouldn't really take Jaime beating Aragorn as gospel. Yeah, I don't take Jaime beating Aragorn as gospel. I think that's George R. Martin. He likes his own creation, and he's allowed to, and that's absolutely fine. Let's have a quick flick through. Wheezy Squeezebox saying, Arya killing the Renegade Night's Watch. Ned would have been proud. Yep, so again, that the first time she killed somebody there that she shouldn't have done in Braavos, that was all about her Stark identity as well. Okay, so this is, I think with that, I'm going to start wrapping up. What we're going to do next week, though, is we're going to look at Maegor. Maegor, I've done a couple of videos recently on Maegor, so if you want a bit of background there, then do look at that. They were both what I do sometimes quite regularly now is doing collaborations with History of Westeros. If you've never come across History of Westeros, go and check them out. Aziz knows so much about this world, but do go and check out those videos if you want. Patrons, I almost forgot to thank you, but thank you so much, patrons. I can't do this without your support, so I hugely appreciate that. I've been teasing for a few weeks new things coming. They will be coming this week, so keep an eye out for that. And what else was I going to say? Moderators, thank you. You're amazing. Again, if you're here watching this live, please show the moderators a bit of love. Okay, with that, though, I will start pointing at things. If you're watching back a bit later, somewhere here will be appearing a link to some more live streams that I have done, and somewhere here will be a link to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you so wish. Okay, that's all for this time. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again.